Hey everyone, welcome back to Wicked Deeds. We're your hosts. I'm Brittany.
And I'm John.
And before we dive into today's case, I wanted to touch on a few little housekeeping items. Don't worry, it'll be quick. First and foremost, I want to thank one of our listeners, Nicole, for her recommendation for this case. It was one I had never heard of until she reached out to us. And second, we just want to say a huge thank you to all of our listeners over the past year. We truly wouldn't be where we are today without you. And we obviously want this podcast to reach even more ears, and one of the best ways to help us do that is by leaving a review. Whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or some other platform that allows reviews, please take a quick minute to leave us a 5-star written review. They help more than you can imagine. And lastly, John and I think it's about time our listeners got to know us a little bit better, as we keep our episodes focused on the case we're covering that week and try to keep ourselves and our personal lives out of things. But we want to do a Q&A episode later this month, so please send us in any questions you have, things you want to know about us, questions about the podcast, and you can send your questions to us via DM on Instagram at WickedDeedsPod, Twitter at WickedDeeds, or you can email us at wickeddeedspodcast@gmail.com. We look forward to reading your questions and answering them in a couple of weeks. Also, keep your eyes and ears peeled for fun and exciting things coming in the new year. With that out of the way, the case we'll be discussing today is that of a devoted father of 3 who vanished into thin air after being seen mowing his lawn one summer morning. At first, anything could have been possible. He could have run away from his life, or foul play could have been at hand. But as more and more details emerge, everything you think you know will be thrown out the window. Today's case is part 1 of the mysterious disappearance of Robert Hoagland. Robert Hoagland, better known as Hoagy, which is what I'll continue to refer to him as throughout the rest of this episode, was born on June 9th, 1963. Now, there are a few details I've been able to find in my research about his younger years, but I do know that when he was in his early 20s and attending the Culinary Institute of America, he met his future wife, Lori. The two were attending the school, obviously, in hopes of becoming chefs or working in the culinary industry in some way after they graduated. The couple later married and went on to have 3 sons, Chris, Max, and Sam. And for a number of years, Hoagy did what he went to school for and spent time working as a chef. But despite his love of cooking, he felt as though he was missing out on his children's lives due to the nighttime hours he was required to work. So because of that, Hoagy ended up removing himself from the culinary world, at least in terms of his employment, and instead got his license to become a real estate appraiser sometime in 2001. Also, according to the disappeared episode on this case, by the time summer of 2012 rolled around, Hoagy had also started working part-time for one of his friends that owned a law firm, and he was pretty much just doing some paralegal work for him, even though he didn't really have a background in it. But one can assume his knowledge in the real estate world was likely helpful in some way in this new role. Now, in terms of where the Hoaglands lived, the couple had bought and owned a home in Newtown, Connecticut, and lived on Glen Road. Lori Hoagland had gotten a job at Newtown High School sometime around 2010 and was working as a culinary teacher there. And I did also want to mention that I have seen a couple comments here and there that Lori and Hoagy may have separated for a short time during their 25-year marriage, but I haven't been able to really figure out when that was or if that statement is even accurate. But overall, it does appear as though they were happily married at the time of Hoagy's disappearance in 2013. So I also wanted to give you a little bit of detail regarding Hoagy's personality. He's been described as a devoted father and family man, and by all accounts, this was very accurate. I mean, he literally left his job in the culinary industry to spend more time with his wife and kids, and his sons vouched for him, saying that he would always attend their soccer games and supported them in various other ways over the years. His family came before everything in Hoagy's mind, even if things weren't always copacetic. He's also been described as understanding, compassionate, and just overall a really good man with a big heart. Now, moving on to the timeline of events for this case. On the morning of Sunday, July 28, 2013, 50-year-old Robert Hoagland ran a couple of errands. First, pretty early in the morning, I think between 6 and 6:30 a.m., he stopped by one of his favorite bagel shops located at 30 Churchill Road in Newtown called Bagel Delight. And the distance from his home to the shop was only about 2.5 miles or a 6-minute drive. And according to the disappeared episode on his case, this was a very common thing for Hoagy to do, and he would often make an early morning trip on the weekends to pick up a dozen bagels for his family to enjoy. From there, around 6:45 a.m., Hoagy then traveled just down the street to a mobile gas station where he filled up the family's Volkswagen Golf, but it's reported that he only purchased half a tank of gas. Not only that, he also bought a map of the eastern United States while in the convenience store, and it was reported that the purchase made in the gas station for both the gas to fill up the car and the map was made with Hoagy's credit card, not cash. And in regards to the map, at first you might think that is a little strange. You're buying a map randomly in the gas station at 7 o'clock in the morning with no real plans to go anywhere that we know of, but Hoagy apparently collected maps and almost never used a GPS. So I can only imagine that he's like one of those types of people that anywhere he goes, if he sees a new map that he doesn't have, he probably just picks it up and is like, oh, cool, add to my collection.
Yeah, that's interesting. And something for people that are listening to think about. Usually we're in the 70s, 80s, and 90s with our cases where it's like, oh, somebody picked up a map, or printed out MapQuest as opposed to having your cell phone available. We're talking 2013 now. He has this available to him.
Yeah.
So,
but he's like the type of guy that's like, nah, I'm not going to use a GPS.
Yeah, it was odd when you said that he picked up a map. I was already like, what?
Yeah.
But then he collects them, and that makes more sense now because I was like, why wouldn't he just use a GPS on his phone?
Exactly, yeah. And I wanted to bring it up because I knew that would be like a sticking point for you.
I was
and
like, red flag right there.
Yeah, why is he buying a map? That's weird.
Right. Does he not want his electronic location to be tracked and he's trying to go somewhere?
Mm-hmm. All good questions, but that's what I've heard anyway about him.
Mm-hmm.
Now, after the trip to the bagel shop and the gas station, Hoagy made his way back to his home on Glen Road and ate breakfast with his son Max, who was his middle son and I think was roughly 22 or 23 at the time of his father's disappearance. It's reported that between when Hoagy got home, presumably around 7:15 in the morning, he had breakfast with Max, paid some bills, had several brief text conversations, and played a handful of rounds of online Scrabble. Then, sometime between 10 and 11 a.m., Hoagy was seen outside mowing the lawn. And from all accounts, it appears as though the last person to see Hoagy was his son Max. And that was when he came out of the house sometime while his dad was mowing the lawn, asked to borrow the car, and said he would be out for a few hours. A neighbor also confirmed this sighting of both Max and Hoagy between that 10 a.m. and 11 a.m. time frame, and I do also believe this person heard Max tell Hoagy that he was going to be out for a couple hours. So he's like completely vouching for this, essentially last sighting. But the thing that I find a little weird about this has to do with the location of the Hoagland's property on Glen Road. So I'm 99% sure I've found the property that they owned, and based on a street view, I think it would be pretty difficult for a neighbor to see, never mind hear, anything that was going on their property. So John, I'm going to send you the street view of the house now so you can see what I mean.
Before even looking at it, I'm wondering if, Hoagy was on the very edge of his property, cutting the grass. Max came over to him, and because he was on the edge of the property, maybe the neighbor was on the edge of their property as well, and overheard it that way. But it's
possible. So there's obviously two different neighbors that this could be, and I don't know which neighbor it was, but when you look at the street view, the house on the right-hand side, like if you're looking at their house, it's on the right, that abuts their driveway. So he wouldn't have been mowing the lawn on that side. But then if you go down the street a little further and you look at the other neighbor's house, it's like there's a ton of tree coverage in between their house and Hoagy's. So it's not like this suburban neighborhood, which is what I expected, where you just have like all these houses that look the same, sitting on small lots and they're all really close together. That's totally not what this is.
So which one is their house? The one with the garage open?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Because you can see on the mailbox there, it says 94. Mm-hmm. And by the way, this is public record, so I just looked up, property records and was able to find it.
Okay. Well, I mean, what reason do we have to doubt this neighbor at this point? So, is it possible? Yes, I mean, most things are possible. Mm-hmm. So let's say, okay, maybe the neighbor did overhear something.
Yeah.
Let's leave it at that for now.
Yeah, that's fine. It was just a thing that I wanted to bring up because you know me. And everybody listening is probably like, all right, Britt, you and your, looking up the properties and all that. But it's just like something that stood out in my mind. So
yeah, I would say, unless we later on find out that this neighbor is somehow involved in his disappearance.
And I'll tell you right now, absolutely not, from what I understand. So,
all right, because then that would be like, oh,
that's a weird comment.
That's weird that this neighbor was able to vouch that he heard Max and Hoagy talking.
Yeah.
And all that. But if that's not the case, sure, I have no reason to disbelieve
what they're saying at this point.
Yeah.
Okay. So from there is where things start to get a little fuzzy in terms of what took place after Hoagy was last seen around 11 a.m. on that Sunday, July 28th. The following day, though, Monday the 29th, Hoagy was supposed to be picking his wife up at, I'm pretty sure, the JFK airport in New York, but I have also seen LaGuardia mentioned a time or two as well. But regardless, she was set to arrive home from a 2.5-week-long trip to Turkey with one of her good friends. And according to Disappeared's coverage on this case, Lori had emailed her husband the day before her flight home, so this would have been Sunday the 28th, to confirm that he'd be picking her up at the airport. But strangely, he never responded to that email. And Lori's flight was set to land sometime, I believe, in the late afternoon on Monday the 29th, but Hoagy never showed up to the airport to pick his wife up and take her back home, which was particularly odd because when Lori was later asked about the fact that he just never showed, she said she'd even heard from Hoagie's friends after the fact, like when she chatted with them, obviously about the whole situation, and his friends had told her, he mentioned to them, like, yeah, I'm planning to go pick her up on Monday, so he had these plans, and it's just obviously now at this point what has happened between 11 a.m. on Sunday and now Monday late afternoon, early evening.
Yeah, and I guess the first alarming factor is that he never responded to the email.
Exactly, yep.
So he knows that he's going to be going there the next day.
Mm-hmm.
They had probably been, holding their conversations through emails, maybe because of roaming charges and stuff like that.
Yeah, probably.
So that's the first alarm,
yep,
that he didn't respond to it, and then now he didn't even show up after he's been telling all these people that he's going to be going to pick her up at this time on this day. So
exactly.
Yeah, that's odd.
Definitely. So as Lori is waiting and hoping her husband is just running late, maybe stuck in traffic, she's calling and texting him repeatedly, but he never answered any of her calls or texts. And after roughly 2 hours of waiting for him, she finally decided to just take a cab. But she didn't take the cab home. She actually took it to her stepsister's house. And I've seen some people question, obviously all over the internet, why she didn't just take the cab home and why she went to her stepsister's house instead. But I looked into this, and the distance from JFK, if that's the airport, is 2.5 hours from her home. You think she's going to pay for that freaking cab ride?
So I assume her stepsister lived closer.
That's what I would assume, yeah. So she's probably like, okay, I'm going to take this cab. I'm going to go to my stepsister's house. It's however far away. I'm not exactly sure. Obviously, she would probably pick that place to go rather than home if it were closer.
Right, and she may be looking for the closest family member to set up a home base to try and figure out why she can't get in touch with her husband.
Exactly. And then she's also with someone that she knows and is not going to have to pay for a ride to then get home from there.
Yeah, so it just makes sense that she would travel to the closest family member's home.
Exactly.
And then figure out what she's going to do from there. If Hoagy is already not answering her phone calls or text messages, calling him and texting him on a 2.5-hour cab ride isn't going to get her anywhere.
Exactly.
So get somewhere, tell somebody, a family member, what's going on, and try to come up with a plan to see what the deal is.
Definitely. Now, as Lori was waiting to hear back from her husband, she learned some particularly concerning news. You see, Lori had been calling all around to Hoagie's friends and family to see if anyone had seen him, and she received this worrisome news from Hoagie's boss at the law firm. He said that Hoagy hadn't shown up to work that day, which was completely out of his character to just ditch work and not call, text, or even email his boss to let him know that he wouldn't be in. So at that point, after hours of calling around and not one word from her husband, at around 7:30 p.m. on that Monday night, July 29th, Lori Hoagland called the Newtown Police Department to report her husband missing. Now, I do know that's a fair amount of time between when Hoagy was last seen and when he was reported missing, and there is more in the in-between there, but you can't expect that Lori would have known anything or have been able to report him missing any sooner, as she was literally in another country during the time that, he went missing. And then she's also literally in the air for like 11 to 14 hours as well. Like, even if someone had tried to call her and let her know what was going on or something, she's probably completely out of touch with being able to talk to anyone.
Yeah, and what time was he supposed to pick her up at again?
I think it was like maybe 4 o'clock. I've seen some contradictory information regarding
4 p.m.?
when her flight was landing. Obviously, you're more than 24 hours. You're about 36 hours at this point since he was last seen. And what I want to get into now, and I'm sure people listening are probably questioning this, well, what's up with Max? Max was home.
Yeah.
Did he see his dad? Was 11 a.m. the last time he saw his dad? What happened there, right?
Yeah.
So...
Well, just to touch on beforehand, if Hoagy was supposed to pick up Lori at 4 o'clock p.m., right?
Correct, yes.
And she reported him missing by 7:30?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
I don't think that's an extended period of time.
No, but I don't think it's questionable about why Lori didn't do anything. I think more so people might question why maybe Max didn't call her or email her and say something, because what we're about to dive into now is that Max didn't see his dad ever again after that 11 a.m. time frame. So
he went from 11 a.m. on Sunday, didn't see him at all at night that Sunday, assuming that he came back home that day.
Which he did, yep.
And then he never saw him the next morning.
Correct.
I think it's believable, and I wouldn't jump the gun on Max just yet.
Yep.
Because if he never saw his dad that night or whatever, say he just came in, he went to his bedroom, and then the next morning, maybe his dad usually goes to work or something. I don't know.
Well, it was a Monday, so that's possible,
I don't know.
but...
Let's hear what the deal is with Max.
Yeah, so I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure it was Lori that asked Max, like, what happened the day prior. Obviously, at this point, she's worried. She knows that Max was home because her other two sons, one was living in South Carolina at the time, and the other was at college, and then he would be, going to study abroad. So, like, neither of them were around, but Max was home. So she asked Max what was going on, what happened on that Sunday. And, he obviously mentioned the last interaction that we know of, the 11 a.m. last sighting. He took the keys, he took the car, he left the house. And then at some point he did arrive back home, I think in the late afternoon, early evening hours.
So Max didn't have his own car, I assume.
So the family, I think, had between 2 or 3 cars. So I think they kind of all just shared them. At that point, it was the 3 of them living in the house. So
if Max had taken one of the vehicles, would Hoagy still have his own to be able to take to go somewhere?
Yes.
Okay.
So Max said that when he got home that Sunday night or early evening, whenever it was on the Sunday, his dad was nowhere to be found. And
then my next question with that would be, was the other vehicle that was available to Hoagy to use, was that at the house?
We will dive into that in just a few minutes.
All right.
Back to Max. So obviously after he arrives home, he sees his dad's not around. He's like, that's weird. He did try calling or texting a few times, never got a response. Then the next morning, he woke up to an empty house. Hoagie's still not there. Again, tries calling, texting, doesn't hear from him. So I think a lot of people would question, why is he not calling his mom? Why is he not, saying, hey, I don't know where my dad is? And honestly, I really don't know the answer to any of this. And that's why I said the events of the afternoon on Sunday and the morning on Monday, it's just fuzzy, and I don't know if Max was more concerned. I don't know if he said something to anybody, if he didn't want to worry his mom when she's about to get on a flight. Who knows? But all I know is Lori finds out that her husband is missing when she gets off the flight on Monday night.
Do we know where Max had taken the car to?
No. Not on Sunday, anyway.
Do we know what time he got home?
Not exactly.
All right.
Sometime early evening, I think.
Okay.
So then the following day, Tuesday, July 30th, Chris, Lori and Hoagie's oldest son, who I think was around 25 at the time, was alerted that his father was missing. And at the time, like I mentioned, Chris was living in South Carolina, so he took a flight as soon as he could and arrived back home to Newtown on Wednesday, the 31st, to assist in the search for his father. So after Hoagy is officially reported missing, the Newtown PD would get to work on their investigation into his disappearance. And based on the disappeared episode on this case, Lieutenant Richard Robinson is who was assigned to Hoagie's missing persons case initially. And from all accounts, it seems as though Newtown PD took it very seriously from the start, and the family did appear to be pleased with the level of care the PD took in attempting to find their missing loved one.
Well, let's not forget, this is also the same police department that was decimated less than probably 7 or 8 months beforehand that dealt with the Sandy Hook massacre.
Correct, yes. And that is something that we will touch on throughout this episode, but for now, we'll table that discussion until a little bit later.
Sure.
Now, from the start, it appears as though several things could have been going on in Hoagie's missing persons case. Either he just up and left his life behind, he planned to take his own life, or he met with foul play. And authorities definitely had their work cut out for them in terms of trying to hang their hat on a theory. But in the early days of the investigation, it appears as though they were open-minded and were just doing all they could to at least locate him. And as we work more and more through this investigation, you may start to form a theory in your mind, but there is a lot to unpack with this case, so prepare to be ping-ponged all over the place with what you believe could have happened to him. Now, before we dive into the investigation into Hoagy's disappearance, I do just want to mention something that I think is particularly important to the story as we continue to work through everything that authorities are able to uncover in the first weeks and months of their investigation. So first of all, as soon as Hoagy was reported missing, authorities put out a BOLO, aka a be on the lookout, for Hoagy's car, which I believe was the VW Golf that he'd been last seen driving and filled the gas tank of on Sunday the 28th. However, I have also seen it mentioned that the Golf belonged to his wife, and like John and I were just talking about a few minutes ago, that the family might have had up to 3 cars. I know there was a VW Golf. I know there was a Mini Cooper as well, which I think was Hoagy's, like he would usually take that car. And then there might have been a third one, but I don't really know. And honestly, it's not all that important to the story because the VW Golf seems to be the car discussed the most. And I also believe that this car had the BOLO put out on it because it wasn't at the house after he'd been reported missing.
Okay. So at minimum, we can assume that there are 2 vehicles because we know about the Golf and we know about the Mini Cooper.
Correct.
Let's assume that Max took the Mini Cooper?
No.
Max took the Golf.
Max took the Golf the day before on the Sunday.
So Hoagy took the Golf in the morning to run errands, put the half a tank of gas in, grabbed the map, then went home, and then Max took that same vehicle later on that day.
Correct. Okay. But interestingly enough, the same night that Hoagy was reported missing and the BOLO was issued, authorities in nearby Bridgeport, Connecticut actually located the vehicle after just routinely running the plate. Now, Bridgeport is just under 20 miles or a 30-minute drive from Newtown, so it's not too far. But the car wasn't found abandoned or anything like that. No, it was found with Max, the Hoagland's middle child, the one who last saw Hoagy, and he was in the car in a very seedy area in Bridgeport, which was apparently known for drugs.
Okay, because my mind was like, the cogs were turning.
I know, I could see your face the whole time. You were like, I am confused.
Because Hoagy took the car in the morning.
Yes.
Then Max took it later, but then, Max never saw his dad again.
Mm-hmm. So but he came home with the car.
Maybe I'm just not following it well enough, but when did they find the vehicle?
Monday night, the night that he's reported missing.
He borrowed the car Sunday. Mm-hmm. Then Monday, Hoagie's reported missing.
Correct.
I was confusing the Sunday night time when he took the car with the Monday after Hoagy had been reported missing being another day and Max being with the vehicle again. So what I can assume, which I don't know if this is accurate, but what I can assume is that Lori calls the Newtown police. They put in a missing persons report for Hoagy. They ask, what kind of car does he drive? She probably doesn't know anything because she's not home at this point. She doesn't know anything about the car. She probably mentioned the 2 vehicles. Mm-hmm. Police more than likely went to a house, maybe for a well-being check, just to see if he was there or, if something had happened to him and that's why she couldn't get in touch. Mm-hmm. And maybe they found that the VW Golf wasn't there. Yeah. That's the car that they put the BOLO out on because, say, the Mini Cooper's still at the home. Mm-hmm. And then from there, because there's a BOLO, all of a sudden this plate gets run and then Bridgeport PD finds it and then alerts Newtown PD. Gotcha. That makes a lot more sense. I was just confusing Sunday with Monday, with Max borrowing the vehicle Sunday and then them finding it Monday. So that was just me being stupid.
That's not you being stupid. I mean, it's tough. This is a tough one to follow. There's a lot to this one.
Really, all we need to remember about Sunday is the last time Hoagy was seen, at least at this point, is 10:30 to 11 o'clock, roughly.
Correct. Mowing the lawn.
Mm-hmm. Then on Monday, he's reported missing around 7:30ish.
Yep.
The BOLO is put out, and Max is later found with the vehicle that authorities believed Hoagy would have been in possession of.
Exactly.
In a bad part of Bridgeport that's known for drugs and...
Yes, and so to circle back to that whole, seedy area of town, Max had been struggling with a drug addiction for the past several years, and he'd been in and out of rehab. He was arrested for shoplifting the year prior. He'd been living at his grandmother's for a time until she said he had to leave, and then he ended up moving back in with his parents just a few months prior to his father's disappearance. But from what I can tell, he had been clean for some time prior to July of 2013, but I do believe he may have started using again in the weeks before his dad went missing.
I was going to ask what the deal was with Max because he's the middle son.
Yeah.
And we know that Chris is the oldest one and he's living in North Carolina, but then we also know that the younger one, Sam, was away at college.
Yeah.
So the middle child, I know the middle child always usually always gets the shaft, but I was wondering why he was living with his parents or why he was staying with his parents. So it's good to know his background. He'd been struggling through drug addiction and whatever else he was going through. And then
now all of this is happening.
Right.
Yeah. So mere hours after Hoagy's reported missing, and obviously as John and I have been talking about a bunch, this is a day and a half after he was last seen, is when Max is found in the VW Golf in this sketchy area that's known for drugs. And as the officer obviously ran the plate and was like, hey, what's going on here? This obviously isn't Hoagy driving this vehicle. You know, he comes up to the window, asks Max, what are you doing here? And Max is honest. He spills the beans and he tells the officer he's there looking for drugs. But he does also make mention that he did have permission to use this car. I assume the cop probably asked him, like, hey, you're not the registered owner of this car. I'm running the plate. There's a bolo. Your dad's missing. Why do you have it?
Right.
You know, I'm sure there's like a bazillion questions that he's asking. And
that's such a kid thing to do, too. He was given permission to use the car the day before.
Yeah.
And then he gets caught with it the next day. And he's like, oh, I had permission.
Yep.
It was permission yesterday, but
it's fine. I'll use it now. Yeah. I mean, he is like early 20s, but still, I feel like, you know, just during that time frame, late teens, early 20s, you're still kind of a kid, you know?
But sometimes when you're put in like a stressful position like that, you resort back to like childlike.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Mannerisms and answers and stuff like that. So
yeah, for sure. So also, interestingly enough, at some point, Max and this officer end up on the phone with Lori, Max's mom. And during this phone call, the officer asks Lori if Max did, in fact, have permission to take her car. And according to an article in the Greenwich Times, it stated that she told the officer that he didn't have permission to use the car.
But what did she know? She was in Turkey.
Yeah, I don't know. But either way, I think, you know, maybe some of his struggles and all of that maybe went into her response to the officer there. Like, we don't want him taking the car to go to places like this. We want him to be clean, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So at this point, the officer tells Lori that Max is going to be arrested, and he was subsequently charged with 1 count of third-degree criminal trespassing and was held in prison on that charge until August 15th, 2013, 2.5 weeks after his dad first went missing.
Criminal trespassing?
Yeah.
Where was he?
Well, I think he was on property that he shouldn't have been. Maybe private property. I'm not sure.
I guess, but you have to be notified beforehand that you're not allowed to be there unless he had been trespassed from a property beforehand. You can't just arrest somebody for trespassing.
Well, he did have a prior criminal record because he had been arrested for shoplifting, but I don't know how much that goes into it or like what the Newtown PD's protocol was for things like, or actually this was Bridgeport. So what the Bridgeport PD's protocol was for that. Maybe it was like a thing that it was a sticking point in that area, so they just arrested him.
I'm sure they probably had a fair reason to arrest him for that, but
gotta have probable cause, right?
Yeah, but I'm just confused as to third-degree criminal trespassing. I'd have to read that statute to really figure out what the hell they're talking about on that one.
Interesting, for sure.
I could understand arresting him for, you know, driving without consent.
You can do that?
Kind of. It's
So if somebody called on me for driving your car, because technically it is your car, it's in your name, and you were like, nah, I didn't give her permission to drive the car, just like, you know.
It gets muddy when it's a relationship, like a marriage and stuff like that, because it's shared property. So, like, if you were driving the car that you always drive, that's your car, I can't call and be like, oh, yeah, you know, my wife just stole the car, and I want her arrested. It's like, well, no, it's shared property.
You're married.
We're married. It gets a little iffy when you're talking about a child, especially a child with, like, a history of drug use and all that stuff, and they've been arrested.
Yeah.
And they're an adult.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really their property. So, I don't know.
Probably one of those gray area things where it was kind of like officer discretion, and he decided in that moment
the
that
trespassing
this is what he was going to do.
But
Yeah, definitely. All right, so now that you have all that info under your belt, let's keep moving forward. So as I mentioned, the Hoagland family seemed to feel as though investigators were doing a good job in terms of their investigation and their search efforts for Hoagy. And very early on, police had searched quite a few different areas in Newtown in their attempts to try and find the missing man, whether that be finding his body, locating him alive and well, or really any indication of where he may have gone based on these searches. First and foremost, of course, the house itself was searched, and cadaver dogs were brought in to see if they would hit on any potential human remains scents, and from what I've gathered, the dogs didn't find anything out of the ordinary in the Hoagland's Glen Road home. And don't worry, we will go over what was found or not found in the house in just a minute.
All right, one of my questions, which will probably be answered.
Yeah.
Was the lawnmower put away?
We will tackle that shortly, don't you worry.
All right.
Also, there were several other areas that were searched that were nearby the Hoagland's home. First of which was a wooded area near the house, and just based on an aerial map of the property on Glen Road, which, John, I'm going to send to you in just a second, you can see that there are a good amount of woods around it. So, I mean, this would be, obviously, an ideal place to be looking in hopes that you might find something.
All right, so what am I looking at here?
All right, so this is an aerial view of the Hoagland's home. So you can see...
Another wonderful thing. This is a 2013 case.
Yes.
This isn't like a super outdated map.
Yes, this is accurate to where things are now. So you can see when you're looking at this in front of and behind his house, it is very wooded. And I mean, you could even see that when you looked at the street view and saw how many trees were in between each house, and they're definitely not right on top of each other. So, you know, at this rate, you could think maybe he just walked off into the woods. Maybe something happened and some, you know, nefarious thing took place and someone placed him in the woods. So this is a good place to start, I think, outside of the house.
Yeah, I mean, it's a possibility. I think it's strange to think that somebody just walked into the woods. I mean, unless they had a dog. You know that this guy liked to go to the bagel shop. He liked to collect maps. Those are things like, you know, almost ritualistically that he did. Did he walk in the woods normally? Things like that. That's something I would want to know about.
He was kind of a hiker, I think. That's something that we'll tackle in a little bit as well. And, you know, I think he was relatively outdoorsy too. Yeah. So I think that's something that, you know, isn't out of the realm of possibility for authorities to think.
You know, it just popped into my head.
Tell me.
With his culinary background, it made me think that he was walking through the woods looking for the mushrooms.
Was he foraging the, oh my God, what are they
the
called?
The fuzzy something, wasn't it?
The
hairy or fuzzy something?
No, they're blue. They're blue mushrooms from Bob's Burgers. The woolly Neptune. That's it. I knew I would get it.
I was there. A hairy, furry, woolly.
Yeah, close. Yeah. Very close.
But then you also can't not mention that the Putatuck, did I pronounce that correctly?
I think so. Yep, that river.
Putatuck River is just to the east of their property as well. I mean, it doesn't look like it's very far at all. So there's also a body of water if you're searching a wooded area that abuts both the front and the back of this property. And then you also have a body of water over there. Probably another great area to start looking.
Yeah, so it's interesting you bring that up because I'm not sure if that river in particular was searched, but there were two others that were, which was the Housatonic River and Lake Zor. And I guess authorities used sonar in those searches to try and see if they would find, I don't know, anomalies or whatever you would assume. I don't know if anomalies is like under the ground versus in the water, but either way, they use sonar to try and find anything.
Yeah, it would probably give you an idea of, you know, if you're using sonar, smaller blips are smaller items, larger blips are larger items. If you have, you know, all little fishies in this body of water and then you have something that's, you know, 10
human
times
size,
larger.
Yeah.
Right. It gives you an idea of what may be in there without having to
do a full
use the
dive.
resources of doing the dive. Yeah.
Makes sense. All right, cool. So unfortunately, though, nothing came from any of those searches. Nothing in the river, nothing from the house, nothing in the woods. At that point, authorities had literally found no indication of where Hoagy could be. And early on in the investigation, because of this, even though we know investigators are doing their best work, the family's happy with how much they're pushing to try and find him. They're just as frustrated because they're literally at dead end after dead end. And the chief at the time stated, quote, "We're doing all the things we should be doing. It's time consuming and labor intensive, but we're doing yeoman's work in trying to find him," end quote.
What's yeoman's work?
So it means very good, hard, and valuable work that someone does, especially to support a cause, to help a team, etc.
What is the origination of the...
What is this, a
word?
Spelling bee?
Use
the word in a sentence. I just did.
Okay. I've definitely seen that term before, And it's usually like in olden times. It makes me think.
Yeah, maybe this was like an old school chief, you know?
Yeah. It makes
like,
me
I'll use Old English.
It's funny because a lot of terms that like aren't used today in normal conversation, I've learned the meanings of through like video games.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. And that's probably where I've seen this before.
Wouldn't surprise me based on the shit you play. But anyway, moving right along. As always, in terms of the investigation, I want to go over several categories. I know we normally start with the scene when reviewing an investigation, which in this case I consider to be the Hoagland's Glen Road home, but in this episode I want to first go over the last sightings of Hoagy on the 28th and kind of dissect those a little more, and then we'll kind of dive into what's uncovered at the house. So, first of all, we know that he was last seen by his son Max and his neighbor roughly between that 10 and 11 time frame on Sunday. But prior to that, he'd been at the bagel shop as well as the gas station. And there were witness statements that placed him in the bagel shop, and then we found out that the gas station actually had surveillance footage of Hoagy when he came into the convenience store that morning to obviously pay for the gas and buy the map. So we can pretty confidently say these were definitely the movements he made that morning, especially because investigators also followed his credit card trail to confirm the sightings as well. So it's like pretty much 100% this is where he was and what he did. So it's not like they're just trying to like pull it out of their butt and say like, oh, we think this is what he might have done. But it's like, no, this is definitely what he did.
We know this is what he did.
Yeah. So also, John, I'm going to send you a couple photos of the surveillance footage of Hoagy in the gas station. And as always, for everyone listening, you can find these photos on our website and our socials. And while John is reviewing these, I do just want to describe for everyone what Hoagy looked like, especially if you can't just pull up the pictures right now. So he was described as 6 feet tall, approximately 175 pounds, bald with blue eyes, and he was also said to have a pretty noticeable or distinctive scar above his left eyebrow. Now, John, while you're looking at this, I can assume that you agree with what I think, that Hoagy looks to be in good spirits. You can see he's smiling and things seem totally fine.
Yes, the only thing that catches me, though, is that one image where it looks like he's looking right at the security camera and smiling. That one catches me.
Yeah, that's a little strange.
Yeah.
Like as if he knew it was there.
Yeah.
Very interesting point. I didn't think of that. Also, in this surveillance footage, you can see what Hoagy was last seen wearing. So he was wearing a white t-shirt, khaki shorts, and what's been described as his signature loafers. Apparently, these were like his go-to shoes and the footwear he regularly chose to put on anytime he left the house. Now, after the gas station, we know Hoagy went back home, he had breakfast with his son, and then he went out to mow the lawn. He was seen mowing the lawn in the same clothing he was seen in on that surveillance footage. However, I do believe he changed his footwear from his loafers to his sneakers, which obviously would make sense considering he's mowing the lawn.
Were they white New Balances?
It's so funny you say that because they genuinely, in the disappeared episode on this case, they obviously do like a reenactment, and it really does look like those kind of shoes in the footage of like this person, you know, acting as Hoagy mowing the lawn.
If you take the stereotypical dad outfit for mowing the lawn, you know it's grass-stained white New Balance sneakers.
Yep, most likely. All right, so from there, this actually gives us a pretty good segue into reviewing the next category, which is the scene, aka the Hoagland's Glen Road home. So there were a few things discovered in the house, but before we review that, I did just quickly want to mention that I personally am a little bit confused on who found these things and when. I've seen reports that it might have been Lori who found them the day after Hoagy was reported missing, along with other reports saying that it was the PD who located said items in the house. I don't know at what point they came in. I don't know when Lori got back to the house, when they brought in the cadaver dogs, all of that. And even if it was Lori that found them first, I'm assuming she probably left them there and then alerted the PD to say, hey, this is what I found, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, that's a good PSA to put out to people. If you find evidence, don't touch it.
Yes, very good PSA. Also, I do just want to mention, too, that I've seen reports that Lori didn't essentially move back into the house, for a lack of a better way to describe it, for roughly 10 to 14 days after Hoagy initially went missing, because I guess she was scared for her safety, because at that point, they had no clue what had happened to him, and, you know, she would have been potentially there by herself, because we know Max had been in jail for 2 weeks. So maybe she felt more comfortable coming home once her son was there, for all we know, but...
Potentially. I think that also if the last known sighting of Hoagy was at the house, they could be processing that scene for an extended amount of time.
Yep, definitely. That would make sense. But anyway, down to the nitty-gritty of what I'm sure you're curious about, what was found in the house.
Yes.
So I wanted to go back to the clothes that Hoagy was seen wearing on Sunday. So those clothes, the white t-shirt and the khaki shorts, were said to be found in the laundry. But the thing I can't quite nail down is if they were in the washing machine actively being washed or already washed, like it was done with its cycle, if they were already clean and found in the dryer, or if they were literally just left in a pile because they were still dirty. Regardless, the white t-shirt and khaki shorts were found in the home, as were Hoagy's loafers, in the spot that I guess he always left them in the living room.
But not the sneakers.
Well, upon further inspection of the residence, it was also discovered that the lawnmower was put away in the garage, and the sneakers Hoagy wore while mowing the lawn were placed neatly next to it. So based on these two things, the laundry and the lawnmower, you can assume that Hoagy had finished up mowing the lawn, put the mower back in its designated spot in the garage, and then changed his now dirty clothes after completing the yard work. So far, these things aren't particularly concerning on their own, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, it seems like everything is in place as it should be. I would wonder if there is another particular pair of shoes that he would normally wear that are now missing. Assuming that he got dressed with another outfit after showering after doing the lawn and then left to go somewhere.
Yeah, that's something that I would want to know too, and I'm just not positive on it because I've seen certain comments that have mentioned nothing else seemed to be taken or removed from the house. Like he didn't take clothing, so, you know, obviously you would assume like if someone had like a suitcase or a backpack and then they had a bunch of clothes missing and the suitcase and the backpack were missing too, you would probably instantly go to, oh, they packed up their stuff and they left. Maybe everything's okay and, you know, they just ran away or something. But in this instance, you don't have any of that from what I can tell.
Yeah, I wouldn't even go to the extent that I was thinking that he packed a suitcase and left. I was just thinking, you know, if he always wore these loafers out, is there another type of shoe? Like, you know me, I have like 3 pairs of shoes that I rotate through.
Yeah, as I'm over here with like 45 pairs.
Is there one of those that
missing?
You know I always wear
that's
now missing? Did he put them on and did he leave? Or if he had left, would he have worn those loafers? And the most likely scenario with that is that he had been taken from the home or had left the home without footwear.
It's a good point to bring up, and I just don't know the specifics on it. So I guess we could assume, because no one's ever said, oh, he had this other pair of shoes missing, that you might think that maybe he just wasn't wearing shoes.
Okay.
But it's also discovered that Hoagie's cell phone, as well as his passport and his blood pressure medication, which he took every day, were left behind in the home. On the other hand, though, his wallet and keys were not found with the cell phone, passport, or medication at that time. Overall, the house seemed to be completely normal and nothing was really out of place. But do you remember how I just mentioned before the whole confusion regarding when Lori came back to the house to like fully live there full time?
Yeah.
Well, I do know that she came back at least after about 10 days. And on August 6th, 2013, she located something else in the home that made her and her sons fear for the worst. Hoagie's wallet and car keys were actually still in the house, but apparently they'd been hidden in the Hoagland's bedroom on a chair underneath a doll.
That's strange. It's also strange, too, like from an investigative portion.
Yeah.
Like if you know that this is the last known location where this person was, you would think that you'd, within reason, because it's not like you're, you know, searching for a criminal or evidence of a crime, you know, that somebody in the house took part in.
Yeah.
You would think that these items would have been found.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know how well this was hidden under the doll. I mean, I just thought that was so bizarre. And when I first read about it, so I did all of my research on this case and I read all of the articles that I could find first. And that was like a common theme. I was like, hidden under a doll. Like, what does this mean?
Side note, who keeps a doll in their bedroom?
Okay, so I literally had here,
That's some Night of the Living Dummy shit right there.
Right? So it says, I literally wrote, I'm sure John will have a comment about the doll. This is very strange. So, you know, I have like my answer
its
here.
Eyes just watching you as you sleep at night.
Yeah, it's like chilling on the chair. I just thought it was so odd. And then when I watched the Disappeared episode, Lori like better explained it, and I guess this was like a doll from her childhood that must have been important to her in some way, and she kept it in this spot.
Put it in the closet.
Yeah, I don't know the whole reasoning behind that. Some people don't have like a fear of dolls. I'll tell you, I do. I watched, what was that called? Annabelle back in the day, and that shit scared me.
Dead Silence? Have you ever watched Dead Silence?
Yes, that was the ventriloquist doll, right? Yeah, that scared the crap out of me. And then Chucky. There's you cannot. If you brought a doll into this house, I swear, John, I would lose my mind. I cannot deal with the dolls.
What about Teddy Ruxpin?
Teddy Ruxpin, why does that sound?
He was like a teddy bear that you could put tapes in, and I think he would talk.
No, thank you.
Okay.
When we have children, they're not getting creepy talking toys like that.
Side note, the other day, it was a Sunday, it was quiet, and my coworkers and I watched Willy's Wonderland.
What's that?
It's a movie that you wouldn't watch because it stars Nicolas Cage, and you have some type of
I don't like
hatred towards him for some
Sorry,
reason.
Nick Cage.
But it's a kind of like a Five Nights at Freddy's type thing.
Okay, yeah.
Where he gets trapped into this Willy's Wonderland. It's like a Chuck E. Cheese type thing.
Yeah.
And he has to fight animatronics that are trying to kill him.
Oh, God. Was it any good? What would you rate it?
It was a fantastically enjoyable bad movie.
Okay. So a 5.
I mean...
Maybe a 6?
Maybe a 6.5.
Wow.
Yeah, it was... You knew what it was going into it.
Yeah.
And without getting any spoilers or anything for people that may want to watch it after the fact, Nicolas Cage has 0 lines in the movie. He never talks in the movie.
Are you kidding me?
It's freaking
Maybe
awesome.
I'd watch it then. It's funny.
Yep.
Well, anyway, back to the whole doll where this side conversation stemmed from. Either way, like, we don't know the whole reasoning behind why the doll was there, why these things would be randomly hidden under it. Also, how big is this doll? I just thought it was a little strange, but for all we know, maybe police just didn't like crazy search the house either when they came in and they just had like the dog sniff, and if they didn't find human remains, then maybe, you know, it was just like, oh, okay, like he's not here, so that's it.
Yeah, I mean, in retrospect now, after just saying I'm surprised they didn't find it.
Yeah.
If you're going in and you're searching a house and you're looking for evidence and stuff, are you really going to pick up a doll that's sitting on a chair?
Yeah, probably not. It's like completely innocuous. Like, You're like, oh, whatever. She has a random doll here. Especially because at this point, they don't know if any sort of crime occurred. They're just looking for a missing man who could have potentially just up and left his life behind and chose to leave.
Yeah.
You know, at that point, they knew the cell phone's here, the passport's here. But if he took his wallet and his car keys, obviously we know the car's not with him, but he's taking other personal effects. But now at this point, they see that literally all of his personal belongings, medication he took every day, his passport so he can't leave the country, his cell phone, his wallet, any money, all of this is still at home.
So now you got to assume...
where would he go?
Right, well, you got to assume now that that house could be a potential crime scene.
Now at this point, maybe. Yeah, but of course they had brought in the dogs and found nothing, so who knows?
Right, but when you bring in a dog, right, you bring in a cadaver dog, it's looking for deceased remains.
Yeah.
And same thing when you bring in a dog and you're trying to get a scent. Like, if they're looking for someone, sure, maybe they give them the loafers.
Yeah.
And they say, sniff the loafers, see if you can find this person in the area.
Yeah.
If you have an unknown suspect that comes into this house that the dog has no scent to work off of.
And maybe just abducts him.
Right.
With no actual, like, physical altercation or something.
Right, what's the dog going to be looking for?
Yeah, no, that's very true. It's a good point to bring up. But here's the big question that I'm surprised you didn't ask, John, but why are his wallet and keys hidden? That's the word that was used to describe this. They weren't just, like, placed under there or tucked away. They were hidden.
So, when you said hidden under something... I think I kind of got off on a tangent about the doll.
Yeah, well, because that was like the first thing that stands out. It's like, it's kind of weird.
But also, we don't know the room layout. We don't know if the doll could have accidentally been knocked over and he had just placed his things down on the chair and then he picked up the doll and just threw it there.
Yep.
Who knows? But yeah, it is strange that they were, quote unquote, hidden.
Yes, well, there's a reason for that. So this whole situation goes back to what we talked about before with Max's drug addiction.
Literally, when you were about to say it, I was like,
see you.
Hold on.
Yep. It's been stated that both Hoagy and Lori would hide things from Max, as when he was not clean, he had a habit of stealing things from his family to either sell those items for money to buy drugs, or if physically his dad or mom had cash, take that.
And then just another way to solidify the reasoning why police may not have found the wallet and stuff. It's like if you have somebody that is an addict and they are looking for money or valuables or something, and you can hide this wallet under a doll and even they don't find it.
And that's innocuous, right? That's a perfect hiding spot.
So understandable. Like if you have somebody looking for something to steal or to use as currency or whatever, and they can't find it under something so obvious, I guess.
Mundane,
it's like,
I guess, yeah.
It's understandable that police didn't.
Exactly.
If they were even looking.
Yeah, you would think maybe they're looking through drawers or like could they find a firearm or I don't know, like anything like that could indicate something, but they're not going to just pick up a doll and be like, wow, look what I found.
Right.
You know, it's just, and I'm sure that's why they chose this spot because they would think, oh, Max isn't going to look under here. It's just a random doll that belonged to his mom when she was a little kid.
A lot of times the best place to hide something is right out in the open.
Exactly. Yep, totally agree. All right, so now I want to go over what I'm calling the kind of like Hoagie's past category of this investigation. So this category will include any information authorities were able to uncover that happened in Hoagie's life prior to his disappearance that could help to indicate what might have happened to him. This could be years ago, this could be a couple days prior. So first I want to start back on Thursday, July 25th, 2013. So just 3 days prior to when Hoagie disappeared. It was discovered that he'd made a quick trip to his local Union Savings Bank branch and withdrew $600 in cash from one of his accounts. And there were also security photos of him at the bank taking this money out, and he appeared to be dressed relatively nicely with a button-down shirt on, but I was like, that probably doesn't mean anything. He most likely had gotten out of work or was going into work or something, but just something I wanted to mention.
He's a man that wears loafers.
Yeah, this is true. This is true.
I am not a man that wears loafers.
No, you are not. You're a man that wears barefoot shoes.
Pretty much.
Regardless, the thing that's weird about the $600 in cash situation is that that money has never been located. And we know Hoagie's wallet and pretty much all of his other personal belongings, which he likely would have taken with him if he ran off, were left at home. So it's just strange that the $600 wasn't with all of those things. It wasn't in his wallet, you know? But the other odd thing about him taking this money out is that he had several $1,000s in a safe at home. And all that money was accounted for, still in the safe, but the $600, from what I can tell, was not added to it. But anyway, something else that was brought up that had been discussed within the Hoagland family prior to Hoagie's disappearance was that he actually had been planning like this month-long hike trip to the Appalachian Trail with Max. And again, this whole thing goes back to Max and his drug addiction. And from what I understand, Hoagie wanted to take his son out into the wilderness and hike for like a month to try and get his life back on track. Almost
reconnect
like
with nature.
Yeah, almost like a sort of intervention or refresh on his life to be like, let's start anew and let's go experience the wilderness and have a dad-son bonding experience. And it seemed like Hoagie was relatively outdoorsy. We kind of touched on that a little bit earlier. And then this is something else that connected back to Hoagie buying the map at the gas station.
Ah, yes. Okay.
So Chris, the Hoagland's oldest son, told the producers of Disappeared that he thought the map could have been purchased because Hoagie was going to use it to get ready for their trip, teach Max how to read the map, all that. And it makes sense with the map being of the eastern United States because the Appalachian Trail is on the eastern side of the country.
Right.
So things are kind of like connecting even though they're confusing.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I didn't question the map being purchased already because Hoagie collected them.
But now that he's gone, would you wonder?
What do you mean?
Now that he's missing, would you say, did he take this map because he planned to go somewhere?
No. I think that this map, I'm with Chris on that one.
Yeah.
I think that this map was probably purchased to use on their trip.
And at this point, too, you have to think, so like, they're almost like essentially little bachelors during this like 2.5 week trip that Lori's gone. So I bet he went to go get bagels, you know, his normal weekend thing, and then was like, oh, I'll grab this map. Me and Max can sit at breakfast and we can look at where the Appalachian Trail goes and talk about this trip.
And map out how we're going to drive out there and then where we're going to get onto the trail and where we're going to go from there. And then I'm sure he probably had a map of the actual Appalachian Trail.
Exactly.
To utilize for that. So yeah, it's probably just all part of his planning for the trip that he wanted to take with his son.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. But there was also a theory that was brought up early on regarding the whole hiking trip, and that was that maybe Hoagy had just decided to go off on this trip by himself, and then maybe some sort of accident happened and he was unable to walk or something along those lines. But to me, I was like, no, that is not even a remote possibility in my mind. And it goes back to all of his stuff is left at home. He takes out this $600 and that's miraculously gone. But where's he going to go? He doesn't have a car.
Right. He doesn't have a car. He doesn't have a wallet. He doesn't have his medication that he
might
takes
not
every
have
day.
shoes.
Right.
Like, where could he go?
Yeah, I don't believe that he would have went on this on his own. I mean, there's too much stuff that was left behind.
But of course, you have to think you're grasping at straws in the beginning. You're thinking, my loved one is missing. What things do I know for sure that I can try and pull a theory out of, because you're just at this loss of like, where could he be?
We talk about speculation a lot where you need to have it rooted in facts and hopefully, it's a grounded idea.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't take a car. His medication is at home. He doesn't have his wallet or any of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
As much as you want to come up with an idea of what might have happened, this is like the weakest theory possible.
Yeah, and I think that's why it was brought up in the beginning. But of course, you're grasping at straws. And I do know that they reached out to the National Park Service just to give them a heads up, like, hey, this is what this man looks like. Keep your eyes open for him. But, I don't know. I feel like if something happened to you, I would try and find any little thing in our lives that could connect back to you now not being here. Whether that be you left for some reason, I would probably grasp at the tiniest little things to be like, he could have done this. Maybe it was that. Because you're just desperate in that moment to say, where is my loved one? So as much as it's essentially a weak theory, I can totally see why maybe the family brought this up and they were like, hey, we just want to tell police about this because we know it was a plan that he had. So lay all your cards on the table and maybe something will come out of it.
Yeah. And I guess when you're theorizing because of an investigation, as opposed to like something that we're doing where we're looking at an overall case and investigation, when you're doing an investigation, I mean, you throw everything at the wall and you see what sticks.
Yes. But there's something else uncovered from Hoagy's past that could have been a potential reason why this theory of him making the choice to just up and leave, even if just for a short time, was even brought up. So we had talked earlier about Hoagy's past and his love of cooking and how he went to culinary school and he had several jobs as a chef over the years. Well, apparently back in 1994, Hoagy, his wife, and their 3 young children just up and left their life on the East Coast behind and traveled with barely anything across the country to California. The kids were young. The Hoaglands had no plans for when they got there. They didn't have jobs lined up. They had no place to live, nothing. And of course, being young and naive, they felt as though it would be easy for them to find these things once they arrived, but they were sorely mistaken. Hoagy had a much harder time finding a job than he ever expected. But at some point, he did end up landing a job as a chef at a country club. However, a short time after he was hired, he ended up getting let go from that job. And 2 days after that, Hoagy disappeared. And because of that, authorities couldn't rule out the idea that because he'd vanished once before, that he wasn't doing it again. Join us again next week as we dive deeper into Hoagy's disappearance. The twists in this case certainly don't end here. Thank you all so much for tuning in every week. We're so happy to have you here. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review before you go and follow us on our socials.
You can follow us on Instagram at wicked.deeds.podcast and on Twitter at wickeddeeds. Don't forget to visit our website, wickeddeedspodcast.com, to take a look at any photos from this episode and view our source material.
But most importantly, tune in next week for an all-new episode.